This time, Operation Arctic Sentry, a hastily named idea for a NATO-wide effort to defend Greenland. It helps stave off Donald Trump's takeover plan for now, but so far Arctic Sentry is little more than an idea. So what would it need, and does the UK have the trained people and capability to play a meaningful part? Also on Sitrep, the Pentagon finally releases its new US defence strategy. Mike's been looking through it to see if it tells us anything we didn't already know. And we talked to a former tank commander who's test-driven Ajax and says it's his favourite. As the Defence Secretary indicates, it's crunch time for the troubled armoured vehicle.
I've been clear that we must back it or scrap it. The work is being done at the moment.
I reckon with a week's training, I could operate in an Ajax reasonably proficiently, and I'd be entirely happy to do it.
Defence Explained.
The Arctic is the gateway for the Russian Northern Fleet to threaten the UK and our whole transatlantic security. And that's why it's so important that NATO doubles down.
If you stand up in that environment and you don't have protective gear on, you'll die. Even the liquid on your eyeballs will start freezing.
This is Sitrep with Kate Chabot and Professor Michael Clarke.
European NATO allies have war on their doorstep, are trying to reinforce their own territory against Russia, and now they're promising defence and deterrence help for Greenland. The list keeps getting longer, Mike.
Yes, it does. But in the case of Greenland, I think there's a lot of military theatrics going on here. I mean, we are looking at sending troops that we don't have to a place that we don't need to send troops to. So there'll be a bit of coming and going, I think. There are things that need to be done in the High North, urgent things, but sending troops to Greenland is really not one of them. So we've got to, as it were, do enough to look as if we're taking that part of it seriously and then get on with what is the serious part of Arctic security, which has got much more to do with navies than armies, I think.
The name Arctic Sentry, echoing NATO's Baltic and Eastern Sentry operations, appears to have been first coined by Belgium's defence minister, but it was swiftly taken on and championed by the UK. So the expectation would be that we'd be one of the heavy lifters. And of course, we're already putting ourselves forward as a key ally for Arctic security through our leadership of the Joint Expeditionary Force, JEF. So we welcome back Ed Arnold from defence think tank RUSI, where his research includes the Arctic and High North, also informed by Ed's own time as an infantry officer in the British Army. Hi, Ed. Let's start with the big picture. Across NATO, what would an Arctic Sentry operation need to look like to be of any use?
Well, ultimately, I'm with Mike here. It's sort of, a Greenland operation is something within the current context that would far more be trying to influence the US than, for example, Russia. I mean, apart from the size of Greenland, I mean, where it is and sort of the choke points which are already managed pretty well by NATO at the moment in relation to the current threat. I mean, the thought that the Russians or for that matter, the Chinese are going to sort of be able to militarily impact or influence Greenland in any way, I think is fanciful. I mean, if the Russians can't take Snake Island, they're certainly not going to be able to take Greenland. So I think it's a bit of a distraction. But I think there's also a really important part here, which is showing allied support to the Kingdom of Denmark. And for that, I think a lot of the Europeans are certainly on board with putting some form of mission or NATO activity on Greenland.
Yeah, Mike, can you just explain a little bit more what your Arctic Sentry would look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two or three places where ground forces are relevant. So Svalbard, I mean, that's important. And that's the island, very northerly inside the Arctic Circle. Second place is the border with Norway and Finland and Russia. So that's in the High North. That's a place where troops might be relevant. And the third place, interestingly, is Iceland. And if you want to think about it, have a look at Tom Clancy's novel, Red Storm Rising. Very good novel about a future war between, as it was then, the Warsaw Pact and NATO. And a lot of that takes place in Iceland in a way that's really quite credible. So that would be another area, I mean, a whole country where ground forces might be relevant. But the areas that are safe as far as ground force are concerned, Greenland, completely safe just because of where it is. If you look at the areas on the Canadian side of the Arctic, so Baffin Island, Victoria Island, Elizabeth Island, completely safe. No problems there. The issue might be that the Beaufort Sea on the Canadian side of the Arctic is melting, and that opens up maybe Victoria Island, maybe Banks Island, possibly to naval penetration at some time in the future by Russian or Chinese ships. So it's plausible that there is a naval job to do there, but really the rest of it is about security of Arctic resources and the ability of the NATO allies to keep lines of communication open on the Northwest Passage that is opening up and the northern route coming from the Pacific to the Atlantic. So it's really it's a naval issue more than a ground forces issue most of the time.
And Ed, we can talk and see in a bit. We have more experience of deploying those into Arctic conditions, but a ground force in such a hostile climate, a huge challenge.
Yeah, I mean, the Arctic is probably one of the most difficult places to operate, and just at a human level, I mean, the environment will kill you far quicker than any enemy would, even before you notice that an enemy's there. So it is a real challenge. But then when you talk about logistics and actually keeping forces supplied, be it by ship or helicopter, again, just makes it far, far more challenging. I think the benefit from a NATO perspective is that quite a lot of NATO members are, they're not just Arctic trained. That's all that they know. Recent reports just come out of an exercise last year where Finnish reservists are going on force on an exercise against the Americans in Norway. I mean, the Finns were basically told, can you ease off a little bit because you're too good? And that because that they are, this environment for them, we as in the UK would consider it elite, the pinnacle of our force capabilities. But for the Finns, it's routine. Same with the Swedes and the Norwegians. So that is a real strength. And I think it's also worth noting that a lot of the Russian combat capability, so particularly the 200th and 64th Motor Rifle Battalions, which were Arctic, really well-trained Arctic troops, they were invested into Ukraine, and the military balance of power in the Arctic is looking far better for NATO now than it did, say, at the end of 2021.
And just to get an understanding of how hostile that environment is, we asked Tip Cullen, a former mountain leader and cold weather instructor during his 30 years in the Royal Marines.
If you stand up in that environment and you don't have protective gear on, you'll die. When it gets to minus 25, minus 30, you get in the stage where you're wearing goggles, and even the liquid on your eyeballs will start freezing and that. So it's, we're talking like different levels. The southern part of Greenland, I would say, would be more like Norway or high north Norwegian conditions. However, it goes further north, more like Canada. It gets more extremes, I'd say. If you're moving across glaciated environments, it's crevasses, there's all different things. Again, more akin to what people expect in mountainous environments, but you're going to have it in that, glaciated Arctic area. I say minimal is a 2-week survival course, basic survival and basic mobility. Live in a snow shelter or under canvas, eat the rations, understand how to prepare them. You have to take between 1,000 and 2,000 per day calories more than you would do in a normal temperate environment. The actual weather conditions will kill you. What will happen? The body will degrade. Your core body temperature will drop. You will then become hypothermic. Your extremities will start closing down. You'll start getting cold weather injuries, frostnip, which will escalate to frostbite, and then your body will start freezing if you don't rewarm. If you do rewarm from frostnip, it will be extremely painful, but you have to get it at that stage or you will cause permanent damage and death after that. So you do have to carry a certain level of survival kit. Because the human body is such a wonderful beast, it's not like put some warm clothes on. So at times you're going to have like less clothing, but then when you stop, you're going to lose heat so quickly, you're going to have warm clothing, layer systems, and big sort of bulky clothing. So you've got to carry a far more kit. As soon as you fire a weapon, that generates so much heat. As soon as that firefight stops, that weapon, because of the moisture that's got in there, that will freeze up solid. So really, it's froze. You've got to get back, dry out, get your weapon, prepare it, and get it ready for, to be able to fire again. So a lot of times it's going to be cloud covered. So what level is your iStar or your UAVs or drones going to be able to sort of penetrate that and look what's on the ground? Even our new tech moving forward with lithium batteries and what we can do with them. Power doesn't like the cold. And then on the ground itself, the attrition and the ability to support armour. How are you going to clear tracks to get the wheeled vehicles to support the armour? Is the armour suitable to cover frozen lakes? You've got to be able to be mobile on a set of skis, a set of snowshoes. Are you going to be staying on cleared tracks? How often are they going to be cleared in a wartime environment? Within minutes or even a day, it'll be pouring with rain. All of a sudden, it's back to minus 20. You're soaked wet through. Everything's froze solid. That could be a showstopper. There's so many different dynamics to an infantry soldier's role in that environment.
Mike, what we heard from Tip makes clear this is specialist stuff. Just to survive, let alone fight an enemy who also wants to kill you. Royal Marines Arctic training is probably the most famous. Arctic warfare is also a specialism for some in the RAF regiment. But realistically, ignoring all other constraints apart from trained numbers, how many ground troops could we deploy to Greenland if it became a real risk?
Well, the maximum I'm sure we could devote to this would be something like a brigade. You can get battalions up to the right level, and the Marines are there. It's their only job now since the reorganisation of the Marine roles in the last year. But I think in the UK, with units going in and out of training, the most I think we would ever want to put together would be at brigade level.
And with Mike, that might, a brigade collectively might be the least amount, but we've also got to look at other issues. I mean, apart from the fact that we've got to resource the regional defence plans, I mean, there is ongoing planning for a potential deployment to Ukraine. Ukraine would have to be the priority.
The best thing, we could do, Kate, with Greenland, in terms of showing something in Greenland, is use Greenland as the training hub, or one of the training hubs, to get people ready for Arctic warfare where it might be relevant. So, sending troops to Greenland to train might be a sensible way of showing some presence when you don't need them there for defence.
And of course, Ed, on the Finland point, right next to Russia.
Yes, absolutely. Although they do have the numbers. And I think they would also, like I said, want to do this. I mean, Finland has been very supportive of Denmark. So if they were to send troops, again, it's also potentially good training. I mean, again, good idea from Mike about sort of training elements in Greenland, maybe sort of semi-persistent. And there are others in, for example, Norway. They could be moved up there. Again, more activity on Iceland, which I think would benefit everyone. The JEF, as an exercise, deployed a command and control node to Iceland about 2 years ago, and that there was appetite to do more of that activity as well. Iceland, member of the JEF and founding member of NATO. So there are other ways to do this apart from just sticking boots on the ground within Greenland, although there'll probably be an element of that for presentational reasons.
Ed Arnold, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Defence Explained. This is Sitrep from BFBS.
OK, time now to catch up on a very long-running saga for the Army, Ajax. When we last discussed it in detail back in November, use of the new armoured vehicle had been paused because 30 soldiers fell ill after travelling in Ajax on Exercise Titan Storm. Since then, there's been political outrage and another injury putting an end to testing. In the last few days, a head has rolled. The civil servant in charge of the programme sacked from the role, and the Defence Secretary told MPs that work is happening now to decide on the fate of Ajax. Back it or scrap it. It sounds like crunch time, Mike. The decision doesn't look easy, but it is hugely important.
Yes, it is. I mean, the Army had based its future thinking, as far as this goes, on Challenger 3, Boxer and Ajax. And Ajax is a huge part of that because it comes in 6 different variations doing different jobs on the battlefield and behind the battlefield. And if we're going to scrap it, you've got to scrap it now and go for something else quickly, maybe like the CV90, or we've got to back it and somehow deal with the issue that it poses for some soldiers. And again, I go back to what I said before. The problems with Ajax is not what's inside it, which seemed very, very good. It is just the vehicle. It's the nature of the actual, the truck itself, the tank, whatever you want to call it. It's the vehicle that is causing the problems, not the job it does or all of the infrastructure that feeds into it. That's the issue. But so in one sense, it seems like a simple issue. Why can't we fix it? It's just the damn vehicle. But there it is. It's a big problem.
Well, someone we regularly talk to on Sitrep has just had a chance to assess the vehicle for themselves and compare with tanks and armoured vehicles gone by. Retired Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon commanded 1st Royal Tank Regiment during his 23 years service. He's just experienced Ajax being put through its paces on a test track, courtesy of its manufacturer.
My own son is shortly to finish Sandhurst and is shortly to begin training as a Ajax troop leader. So, hearing everything, I wanted to have a good look at it from myself. The other element is, the threat profile that we're facing at the moment is probably the worst and the most challenging, certainly since the end of the Cold War, perhaps since the end of the Second World War. And the Strategic Defence Review last year, which I think was a really good piece of work, talked about how we were going to fight through recce strike, being the whole ethos of how we will win on the contemporary battlefield. And Ajax is the main land component to recce strike, so it's absolutely got to be up to speed.
So what did you do, Hamish? Did you literally just ring up General Dynamics and say, can I have a spin?
Yeah, pretty much. I think everybody knows I work for the Telegraph and write for them on most days. So with my Telegraph hat on, exactly that. I rang them up and said, can I have a spin? Can I do a test drive? And, as the article is posted, I said I want to do a sort of Top Gear type assessment. And they said, yeah, sure, come down to Wales. So most of my time was spent on the vehicle, in the turret, looking at all the ISTAR, the intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition and reconnaissance capable, which is all part of the recce strike business. And then, trying to assess, and I admit in 6 hours, it's difficult to work out whether, if this does have a real noise or vibration issue. So we drove around the track over the rumble strips. I know they're called something else, but to me, they're rumble strips, and up and down the knife edge, and also sitting down working. Most of my experience is spent on tanks and mostly in Challenger 2, but you sit down in an Ajax and it's all TV screens, which is pretty new. And I sort of understand when people say, yeah, you get a bit car sick if you're sitting down in this thing, hammering across country, looking at a lot of screens. I think anybody who's looked at their mobile phone too much or try to write articles while in the back of the car will appreciate, yeah, that is possible. So I was interested to see about that, but looking at the capability, the sort of thing this stuff does. And again, without giving away anything that's confidential, some of the defensive aid suites, the acoustic sensors that can track incoming drones at sort of 6Ks and engage them at 3, some of the laser sensors, and the actual capability for identifying the enemy was transformational. And on the noise and vibration, even with my tinnitus, it's not something that seemed a problem to me. And I admit, only driving around for 6 hours, it seemed pretty similar to Challenger 2. Challenger 2 is a much bigger vehicle, of course, but that's what I was trying to get.
And Hamish, the majority of troops who've travelled and trained in Ajax, like you, suffered no ill effects at all. But even if we look solely at recent events, after updates to mitigate noise and vibration issues, 30 soldiers did suffer symptoms on Exercise Titan Storm in November. Another soldier suffered injury in December during further safety trials. Clearly only a minority are affected, but these don't look like isolated incidents. Is 6 hours like you spent in this vehicle enough really to make a judgment on whether these are systemic problems or not? And this is a recce vehicle which troops would be spending long periods of time in, more than 6 hours.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely no part of the decision organisation. So, whatever I write and say, I'm sure will have no impact on the final decision that's made. But I think it's important to try and, there's an awful lot of myths out there. There's an awful lot of wheat and chaff. Again, somebody today was telling me, well, people are moving around in the back, sat in the back. That's not good for them. Well, there ain't no people in the back of Ajax. Ajax is a recce vehicle. Then on the vehicles that we see, people are saying, well, the back door is crushing people. There isn't a back door in Ajax. There's an escape hatch, but there's no hydraulic back door. So, yeah, I accept that entirely. 6 hours isn't long enough, but it can not be on the wit of the Ministry of Defence and General Dynamics to make sure that these injuries are reduced to a minimum.
And Hamish, did you, though, ever see anything comparable in your time on chieftain tanks or other tracked vehicles where soldiers were left vomiting and shaking but acclimatised to a vehicle over time?
Well, I can't remember any particular incidents, but I've certainly seen loads of injuries on vehicles. That again, that's unfortunate, but it does happen. I mean, the one thing I would say that back in, when I first started in this business, we would spend months, 2 or 3 months at a time on exercise. And as a troop leader in my first 2.5 years in the Army, I probably spent 12 months at least out in the field. Now, that is just not happening now. That is unaffordable for the MOD. Whole fleet management, where you swap vehicles all the time. I had the same tank for 2.5 years. That familiarisation and just spending time really does help one get used to it.
And what about the test track you went on? Because with your experience of sharp end operations in tanks, does that track that you were on really replicate the range of what the vehicle and those on board might go through, be it on Salisbury Plain or the other side of the world?
Yeah, no, of course it doesn't. You're not going up and down steep gradients, although we did go up and down the knife edge. And I know there is a concern that the vehicle is unbalanced or top heavy. I was certainly going over the knife edge, which is just as steep and high as the ones in Bovington. I had no issues at all. I felt entirely safe. But you can't replicate wartime conditions on a test track. But when one of the issues or the significant issues seems to be vibration and noise, driving around flat out for 6 hours on a track, going over things, I think is, you get a feel for it.
You suggested earlier that the training time might be a bit of an issue. Why do you think shorter training times is an issue? Is it because your body, you have to learn how to handle the vehicle differently or mitigate the way it affects your body? What is it about the training time that would have an influence?
Well, I don't know about the physiology to it, but the psychology is very much, certainly in my experience, and I suppose people of my generation, where you spend days and days on these vehicles and you get used to it. I suppose, I don't know if it's a similar sort of story if you're a sailor. It takes a while to get your sea legs. So I think it's taken a while to get your tank legs.
You said earlier that your son is perhaps going to be in one of these Ajaxes one day, and as a father you were interested to know what they were like. What's your verdict?
Well, as I've written in the paper, to me, I think it's an outstanding vehicle. The capability that it provides to the recce strike is phenomenal. I would happily serve in Ajax myself. I reckon with a week's training, I could operate in an Ajax reasonably proficiently, and I'd be entirely happy to do it. And I'm certainly not recommending to my son that he chooses another regiment.
Hamish de Bretton-Gordon there. Mike, it's a glowing review from his own experience. It sounds like something that could be transformational for the Army, if only they could rely on it not making some troops ill or injuring them.
Yes, I suspect that they'll have to go with Ajax now because it's too far down the line, and somehow work out a way of insulating the troops, or some of the troops, from the effects that it has.
So one harsh but arguably pragmatic suggestion that Hamish offered up, it seems a small minority, as you said, are affected by this illness issue. Should we just say then those who are affected need to be found different roles, all sorts of health criteria apply to certain roles in the forces?
I mean, that might be a short-term answer in order to get it into service properly, and then maybe find a solution to the residual problems, if that's what they remain as, in due course. But we can't wait. I mean, in the old days, we could have said, let's get this right before we field it. Well, we haven't the luxury of time anymore. So I think a short-term answer might be, let's work with it with the majority of troops who can work with it, and see if we can find out ways of fixing the vehicle in the effect it has on some people. That's not a bad idea, actually, a pragmatic short-term fix to get something into service quickly.
Do you think we'll have a decision anytime soon?
I suspect so. I don't know by soon whether we mean in a couple of weeks or in a couple of months. But I think by the late spring this year, the government has got to have made its mind up on this. A delay because people can't grasp the nettle of making a hard decision. That's a sort of delay we really can't live with at the moment. We just don't have the time.
This is Sitrep
from BFBS.
Now, before we go, I just want to spend a little time on an official US government document, 24 pages long, that was published online late on Friday with no announcement, no fanfare. The long-awaited new US National Defence Strategy dropped quietly while we were all picking our jaws off the floor about what Donald Trump had just said about NATO allies avoiding the front line in Afghanistan. Mike, I'm thinking of the old phrase, a good day to bury bad news.
Yes, it was in a way. It suddenly came out. None of us knew it was on the way. So, yes, and it is consistent with the National Security Strategy that came out on November the 25th. And they are aligned, at least in, as it were, ideological terms, but there were not many details in this. We were waiting for details about troop numbers. There's nothing in there about numbers. It's all about political orientation.
So if I just pull out a few quotes from our perspective that sum up the key points, here they are. Russia will remain a persistent but manageable threat to NATO's eastern members for the foreseeable future. As the department rightly prioritises homeland defence and deterring China, other threats will persist and our allies will be essential to dealing with all of them. Our allies will do so not as a favour to us, but out of their own interests. And Europe and other theatres, allies will take the lead against threats that are less severe for us, but more so for them, with critical but more limited support from the United States. Mike, none of that feels surprising or new. Is this actually just writing down what we've heard and seen in action for the last year?
Yes, I think it is. And the first quote that you mentioned there is probably the most important. They say Russia will remain a persistent but manageable threat to NATO's eastern members for the foreseeable future. Now, that's what we used to say about Russia before 2022, before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And it's as if the United States is saying, well, you know, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine hasn't really made a big difference to European security. It's still only a regional problem. It's throwing us back to where we were before this Ukraine war erupted in the way that it did. But most of us in Europe, I think all of us in Europe, in major governments in Europe, now understand there's no way back from this, that we are in a very, very different environment now in European security. But the United States simply doesn't accept that.
And some had hoped it might provide clarity on whether we'd see US military capabilities moving from Europe or not. The detail isn't in there. Does it give any hint of a possible shake-up still to come?
Well, it certainly hints that there will be a shake-up, but it doesn't really tell us whether they're going to draw down more in Europe and a bit less in East Asia or in the Indo-Pacific. That would be implied, I think. And also, you know, if the United States is going in for a Western Hemisphere policy of thinking just about the Americas, then, you know, how many troops do they need for that? Because the threat to the United States in the Western Hemisphere is not a military threat at all. It's a threat that the Trump administration defines as a threat of illegal immigration, narcotics, and serious organised crime. So in a way, you know, they could actually lay off an awful lot of troops if that really is the threat that they're going to concentrate on, and just increase their police and FBI forces. That would be the logical conclusion from this. I don't think they will do that. But when you look at what they say their priorities are and where their troops are, they just don't match at all. So my guess is, pragmatically, that the United States might create a 25 or 30% drawdown in Europe and then smaller drawdowns in the Indo-Pacific. That's what I would guess. But I'm only guessing on the basis of what I would think if I was sitting in the Pentagon, having on the one hand a sort of demand from the White House to reduce the number of troops, and on the other hand thinking about all of the jobs I'm supposed to perform as a Pentagon official. So that would be my guess. It would be heavier drawdowns in Europe, but nothing actually completely undermining the ability of United States forces to operate around the world.
And there's a lot of rhetoric in there. President Trump is named 52 times. Joe Biden just got 2 name checks in the last version. It is easy to dismiss it because of that presentation, but is there some real strategy beneath the surface?
There is a strategic shift, yep. I mean, the people who think in Western Hemisphere terms are in the ascendant now in the White House, and that's not by and large people in the Pentagon. So this is not just rhetorical. There is a shift of resources and a shift of orientation towards the Western Hemisphere, meaning North and South America. But whether that will serve US purposes, even in the medium term, I seriously doubt. So yes, this is serious. Yes, it's real. How long it may last, I'm not so certain about.
Mike, thank you. And my thanks to all of our guests. That's all for now. Professor Michael Clarke and I will be back with another Sitrep next Thursday. But around the clock, you stay up to date with this turbulent world at forcesnews.com. From me, Kate Chabot, thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.